Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Duels. This week we are going to be looking at the Grixis Brains deck. And without further ado, let's get into why it's called such a thing. Okay, so, to start off, Brain in the Jar is where it gets its name from, mostly. So pay 1, tap, you can put a charge counter on it, and then you can cast any instant or sorcery equal to the number of charge counters without paying its mana cost. So essentially, if you charge this thing up high enough, you can cast 6 mana cost spells for a 1 mana, in a nutshell. You can also remove the charge counters whenever you want, but it's not going to happen too much unless we're in a bit of a situation where we need to cast something cheap on the next turn. The way that this deck wins is through Rise from the Tides. Put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield tapped for each instant or sorcery in your graveyard. So the basic strategy for this deck is to fill our graveyard full of instants and sorceries, cast this, and then attack them with the zombies. So usually by the time you're casting this, you have a lethal amount of zombies when you cast Rise from the Tides. But the downside is that it actually comes in tapped, so your opponent has a turn to respond to what you're doing before you win. However, with Brain in the Jar, you can cast this entirely on instant speed on the end of his turn for 1 mana if you've got the right amount of counters set up. If you don't, however, you can use Part the Water Veil, which allows you to take an extra turn after this one. So if you have 12 mana, for example, and no Brain in the Jar, you can Rise from the Tides for 6, Part the Water Veil for 6, you get a lethal amount of zombies, and you get the turn to untap them without your opponent getting to remove your creatures. The best part of this is most of the removal in this format is sorcery speed, so you cannot allow your opponent to untap or cast any of their removal spells, otherwise that's pretty much the game. But now that the main strategy's over, we'll have a look at the rest of the deck to see how it stays alive long enough. So we ended up going for a Grixis build, mostly because I went for blue-black, and I realised that there wasn't enough removal to keep the game going on long enough to win. So with red, we have access to a lot of burn spells, and a few more special cards that make this deck so much better. But mostly, Fiery Impulse deals 2 damage to target creature, it's a 1 mana spell, and it has Spell Mastery, which turns it into a 3 damage spell. And since we're filling our graveyard full of instants or sorceries, Spell Mastery is almost certainly going to be online when you need it most. Disperse is pretty much our way to get rid of Planeswalkers. We can't permanently get rid of any of them, but hopefully with Disperse we get to bounce their Planeswalkers away, stop them from ultimating or anything of value. We can get rid of tutelages and other enchantments that may have stopped us in the past, so that's what Disperse is in here for. Displacement Wave, it's a take it or leave it kind of card currently. I still haven't found out the best card to replace this yet, so for right now this is what it is. It's essentially a mass bounce spell. It returns all non-land permanents with converted mana cost X or less to their owner's hands. Unfortunately, this hits your own stuff, so if you've got a Brain in the Jar with a few counters on it, then it will hit it if you do it for 2 or more. It's great for doing for 0 to get rid of all the tokens as well, so if they're doing a token-based strategy, you can just cast it for 2, get rid of every token on the battlefield, or even their flip Planeswalkers, because the new update for flip-related cards still isn't in effect. So currently, flip cards like werewolves and the creature planeswalkers still get hit with Displacement Wave for 0. I think in future on the next updates that's going to be gone, which makes this card a lot worse. So if you need to change a card out, it's probably Displacement Wave. Nagging Thoughts is one of our dig deep and drop cards into our graveyard kind of cards. So look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So if we get 2 instants or sorceries, we're putting one into our hand for card advantage, the other into our graveyard for the Rise from the Tides. And we can also Madness it, so if we discard our card for any reason, we can use the Madness cost on it instead. So a great little card, key piece in this game. You want to have all 4, because it just it synergizes so well with what we're trying to do. It's the best way to self-mill yourself, other than a few other cards that we'll come across later. Grip from the Royal, great for tempo. So 3 mana, tap target creature, it doesn't untap on its untap step, and you get to draw a card. Keeps your card advantage through the cantrip, taps them down to slow them down to give you plenty of time, and if you've just Brain in the Jar for 1, you can cast the Surge cost for essentially casting it for 1. So no matter what spell, if you've got 1 mana up, you can tend to Brain in the Jar to get that Surge cost online. Geist Blast is another reason why we put red into this deck. So it deals 2 damage to target creature or player. It's alright removal. For 3, not great. However, for 2 and a blue, you can exile it from your graveyard, which it'll be very likely to be in our graveyard. And we get to copy target instant or sorcery spell you control and choose new targets. So Part the Water Veil, which is take an extra turn after this one. If we copy this, so instead of casting it for 6, we cast it for 9, or even Brain in the Jar for 1 with Part the Water Veil, and then copy it for 4, then you get to take 2 extra turns after that, which gives you plenty of time to Rise from the Tides and attack twice before they get to untap. So Geist Blast is another reason why we went red. Another reason why we went red. And now that I've put it in there, I feel like it's perfect. It fits absolutely fantastic. Now, Pieces of the Puzzle is a key piece of the puzzle. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library, put up to 2 instant or sorcery cards from among them into your hand, the rest into your graveyard. So it's 5 cards deep down. It's essentially a scry 5, draw 2, if you can get 2 instant or sorceries, which most of the deck is. You'll notice that we're not running any creatures other than Possessed Scabs, which get card advantage in their own rights. So pretty much everything that this is going to hit, except for lands, is an instant or sorcery. So we can also, if we're going to win next turn anyway, we can just not take them and get 2 extra zombies off of our Rise from the Tides in the future. Unfortunately, this card is currently bugged, and it does not allow you to take instants from anything that you collect. However, I haven't lost due to it. It's bound to happen eventually, but I have a lot of mass removal in sorcery speed, so for the most part, the cards that I want are actually sorcery cards. So you Rise from the Tides, your Part the Water Veil, sorcery speed, you're never going to not be able to pick them with Pieces of the Puzzle. So once the updates come round and they fix this, it's going to be so much better, but until then, it's a little bit busted. But this deck cannot survive without it. It simply cannot mill itself quick enough without this card. So bugged or not, it is a vital part, and that's why it's a 4 of. Radiant Flames does not work with Brain in the Jar. If you cast it with Brain in the Jar, you have not spent any colours to cast it. So never use Brain in the Jar to cast Radiant Flames. Saying that, once I'd realised that I was using 3 colours in this deck, Radiant Flames became the best it could possibly be. So it's 3 damage to each creature, where X is the number of colours spent to cast Radiant Flames. Perfect mass removal, perfect to slow your enemies down. Hits almost everything in the format except for ramp creatures. Absolutely key. Languish, again, if you're running black, it's almost a must-have. All creatures get -4/-4 until end of the turn. Mass removal, absolutely should not ever not put Languish in a deck like this. Slows them down so much, it's unreal. Possessed Scab, the only creature in this deck. When Possessed Scab enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery or creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Creature card is irrelevant. There are no creatures in our graveyard, and there never will be, because Possessed Scab, when it dies, gets exiled. So we won't be getting Possessed Scab to get Possessed Scab, for example. But if we've accidentally not being able to pick up our Part the Water Veils, or we need another Rise from the Tides, or even we just need to self-mill ourselves with Pieces of the Puzzle, Possessed Scab gets it all back. It is essentially 5 mana, take any card you want from the deck, it's a tutor. Because by the time you're casting this, you've milled yourself to death, and most of the cards that you're going to be using are in your graveyard at that point in time. Fantastic. Pour Over the Pages, an expensive card draw spell, but it is draw 3 cards and untap 2 lands. then discard a card. The discarded card is great for nagging thoughts because you can madness the discarded card. We also have Drownyard Temples in there, so you can use that to discard and get it back from your graveyard on the future turn if you want to. The untap 2 lands means that if you are at 5 mana and you do have your Brain in the Jar, you can untap the 2 lands and still do the Brain in the Jar trigger on the end of your turn. Absolutely fantastic. Draw 3 cards usually means you get to discard as well. So you get to throw away the instants and sorceries that you're not planning to use, which makes Rise from the Tides even stronger. Key piece. Maybe put one more in here. I'm thinking maybe cut a Displacement Wave and put the 3rd Pour over the pages. But really, this deck is quite expensive. It's got quite the rump. If you've noticed, there's a lot of 5 and 6 costs, which is why I went it down to 2. Maybe, though, if you want to get rid of Displacement Wave, maybe put another Pour over the pages in. It's up to you. Jace, Unraveler of Secrets. So this guy doesn't work that often. As much as he is an amazing planeswalker and a mythic and should be, most people would like to put him in every blue deck possible. I don't find he's that useful that often in this deck from what I've been playing. He has some useful mechanics, but for the most part he's just delay and card advantage. So he's +1, scry 1, draw a card. Pretty good. You know, you get to sort out the top of your deck, make sure it's what you want. If it's not what you want, then you gamble for the next card. You can also bounce creatures, so he can defend himself with his -2 ability. A lot of the time, though, I've found when you -2 to bounce a creature away, there is another creature that can kill him when he gets the 3 loyalty, so it's not so useful. And since we don't have any creatures to defend him, he's a little bit vulnerable. So yet again, if you wanted to cut a card, this might be the card to cut. His ultimate, however, hopefully we get to do it. I've not managed to ultimate him yet throughout the entire time we've been playing this deck. So you get an emblem with whenever an opponent casts his first spell each turn, counter that spell. That is advantage that cannot be underestimated. That means essentially they have to play 2 cards every turn, and the first card has to be a throwaway. So if they're playing a ramp deck where their cards are like 5 and 6, it means they've got to spend 5 mana just to get their first cards countered. It's card advantage in a deck that really, really needs as much time as it can. So if you can ultimate Jace, fantastic, but it's not likely. So if you want to cut him, it's fine. The deck won't suffer for it. Probably might even benefit for it. It depends on the next update, maybe, when we get some more cards. There might be a better card for this. The other Jace as well is pretty much the same. I've tried him out and he doesn't really work very well, I've found. Part the Water Veil, key piece, key combo piece. So take an extra turn after this one, exile it. That's the unfortunate part, that he gets exiled. So you probably never want to awaken this. You may end up doing it in desperate situations, but for the most part it's in here so that you can part the Water Veil and Rise from the Tides in the same turn, allow yourself to untap and kill them before they get a chance to use their sorcery speed removal. With Geist Blast as well, we can copy this and take 2 extra turns, 3 if we've got enough mana, but that's unlikely. And yeah, it pretty much speaks for itself. And Rise from the Tides, this is the game winner. Put your 2/2 black zombies onto the battlefield taps for each instant or sorcery, which is usually about 13 or 14, which 13 or 14 2/2s is lethal damage no matter what life they're on, as long as they aren't playing life gain anyway. Hopefully we get to show you this combo. You can Brain in the Jar for Rise from the Tides for 1, and then part the Water Veil. So if you're on 7 mana, you've won. If you're on 12 mana, you've definitely won, just so long as you've got these 2 in your hand. There's plenty of other ways to win, and if you're lucky, you can just Rise from the Tides, not get your creatures bounced or destroyed, and win from there. I wouldn't do that. I would always hold on as long as possible in hopes that you get to combo kill them out and give them no chance to win whatsoever. So, yeah, that's pretty much the deck. We'll go on to the land base now. So, we have... Bless you, dog. We have a very, very strong skew here. If you've noticed as well, we have 25 blue, 4 black, and 8 red spells. We get most of our black and red from our dual lands, which also provide us blue mana. For the most part, it's because the majority of the deck throughout is blue, and we want to always make sure that we have double blue, because towards the late game we've got double blues left, right and centre, and we don't have more than one double black in here, and I think that's the only red. So yeah, we only need a single red source and 2 black sources for the entire game, so this is why this skew is in here. I would cut the swamps and mountains all together, but I like the idea of having 3 evolving wilds to potentially fetch the red or black mana if you really need it in a dire situation. That's what they're in here for, to thin the deck out as well, so that you're drawing into more useful cards. So that's why the basics are in the same sense they are. Wandering Fumarole, it's a great blocker. That's all it's in here for. You're not going to be winning by damage with the Wandering Fumarole, not very likely anyway. And it is a blue-red land as well, so if it's down early, you've got your singular red source, and you've got your blue source. A single Smouldering Marsh and a single Sunken Hollow. We didn't want to have too many out-of-colour, non-blue dual lands, essentially. And for the most part, most of our alternative colours come in the form of dual lands. So I find that these usually come in tapped whenever I find them. So they're only a single one. But if you catch them, they can actually have the Drowned Catacombs and the Sulphur Falls untapped, which is why they're in here. Just for a little bit more mana fixing. Maybe play around with the mana. I haven't played this deck too much to find out that the mana source is all wrong. But we'll have to see. Maybe in the matches we'll find out for sure. So as I said, Drowned Catacombs and Sulphur Falls, almost a guarantee that they should be in here. They nearly always come in untapped, so it's an untapped dual land, turn 2, which there's nothing better. Drownyard Temple, it's a 2-of. It is a colourless mana, and it's also a ramp in its own way. If you discard this, you can pay 3 to cast it from your graveyard, which means you can technically get 2 lands in a turn with the Drownyard Temple. It's also great discard fodder for your Pour Over the Pages, and if you've been milling with pieces of the puzzle as well, you can't get the Drownyard Temple from it, so it will fall into your graveyard at some point, which means there is a second land there always for you to grab. So that's going to be the deck. If you've got any improvements, be sure to leave them in the comments below. We do return to these decks in future, and this one certainly does need a bit of improvement. But it is a really fun deck, and I would strongly advise you see the games that should be following after this. So, if you've liked the content, be sure to leave a like. If you've loved the content, be sure to subscribe. And if you're not quite sure, stay for the end card, where match number 1 will be waiting. And as always, I'll see you later.